Hi friends, David here from Above AVL, and today we want to look at Christmas light controllers. So, maybe you've seen these things, maybe you haven't, but you're thinking about doing an animated Christmas light show, which means that you need controllers, okay? And so there are today so many stinking controllers on the market. There's so many brands. There used to just be one or two, now there's a lot. How do you find the right one for your needs? Let's dive in. When it comes to Christmas light controllers, there's kind of a top level way to look at it and then a little bit more in depth way to look at it. Okay, so we can figure out what's best for you. So there's going to be a few different types of controllers. On the outside, the most obvious one when you're buying it is one that's completely ready to run in a case versus one that's literally just the circuit board and you've got to buy all of these other accessories. So, what goes into a controller, first of all? If you're brand new to this, you might not be aware of it. Okay, so pop open this ready to run. And inside, we've got a variety of lovely things. Okay. So you've got the controller board itself in here, and that's mounted down here on a mounting plate in this particular example. You've got wiring between that and the power supplies. Okay. In this case, we've got two in here. You've got the pigtails all wired in coming out through cable glands. This is the other end of the cable glands for all the Ethernet connections that are available. And then you've got, wire between, the other power supply. And in this case, there's actually a small network switch built in as well, which is super cool. Okay. So all of that is the stuff that goes in to make it work. Powering the controller, wires coming out, network coming in and out, etc., etc. Okay. So when you buy a controller that's just a board, that's everything you're missing, right? But there's a little more to it. Okay, so when it comes to choosing a controller, there's a few different ways and food for thought of how people build them and how they kind of get the most out of them. Okay, so there are a lot of different controllers on the market. The biggest difference between them is that some have a show player built in, like the Culp controllers. They were the first to have a show player built in, and there are other ones now that do. And then there are ones that don't have a show player built in, including the Genius controllers, the Falcons, which don't really have a show player built in. They can kind of sync and have some files on them. The geniuses can have files on them, but don't really have a full show player, as I said, etc. And then you're going to have other controllers like WLED controllers and other various ones that may or may not even be able to connect to your home network via Ethernet. They might only be Wi-Fi. Okay, so that's going to be my first big delineator on controllers is okay, Wi-Fi versus wired. Now, I am famous for going, hey, you can run your controllers on Wi-Fi if you want, and it will probably work well. Lo and behold, we worked through people over the years, and if you have a really solid network setup, you can totally run your show on Wi-Fi. But even with a really solid network setup, what we found is it's just sometimes the timing between different controllers gets slightly off. It's just never quite as clean as actually wiring them all together via Ethernet and having them all on their own little closed show network, or if your home network can take it, a larger network. Okay, so in that case, it doesn't really matter if a controller would have Wi Fi or not. What matters most is can it connect via Ethernet to your network. So in this case, I've got a Cope. In this case, I've got a Genius. Both have that ability. Okay, there's also Falcons, there's Hinks Picks, etc. And so if you're looking at all of them out there, how do you choose, right? Ultimately, across all of the major brands, the cost of the controller boards and the cost to kind of put everything together that you need to get a functioning controller is relatively similar amongst all of the hobby brands, which is pretty cool. There are not really any that are like massive outliers. If you take a Cope and you buy some power supplies and you get the Pi and the SD card and the USB and all the stuff, it essentially ends up costing about as much as a Genius, which has everything all in one, right? The Falcons are very similar price too. So when you see all this, you go, how do I choose? Right. I mean, ultimately, and we've been doing these videos for years on choosing controllers. We spend a lot of time watching the market. We spend a lot of time working with people. And I used to really, really like FPP based controllers like the Culps. And they're not bad. They're not bad. But over, especially when we talk to our folks that run hundreds and thousands of commercial controllers, what we found is the FPP based controllers, while they're good, sometimes they're bad. Being that FPP is running and being developed outside of these controllers means that sometimes there's software versions that just plain screw them up or have weird bugs that cause issues. And we found that every year it seems like there's something different with the FPP based controllers that end up causing an issue. So, kind of backpedaling on a previous recommendation, and now we really honestly like running a controller like the Geniuses or the Falcons that is not FPP based, but can integrate directly with X Lights and can take that Ethernet data directly. So you've got your show player somewhere, you're streaming, you plug that in to either a network switch or a full network that includes your controllers, and they just run data between each other all day long. This is what we found to be the most reliable setup over the long term. It just plain works, and there tends not to be any issues that crop up as long as you don't do anything stupid. Out of all those brands, what do we recommend? Obviously, Falcon is the old school. Falcon's been around probably the longest out of most of them. I mean, people were using the SAN devices before that, but out of the major brands that people like in this hobby today, Falcon's been around the longest, and they make a solid controller. There's nothing wrong with the Falcon. Um, we've really found that we love the Genius controllers. They've innovated, been at the forefront with things like looking at electronic fuses and deciding, the best ways to protect their controllers, to set up everything inside, to have the most reliability. Their software is second to none in terms of configuring them, in terms of working with them in X-Lights. They work really well. If you do need to change out or build a controller, having these terminals where they have a quick flip instead of using a screwdriver is really, really nice. And we found that that's what seems to give them a little bit of an edge over everybody else's. Really liking Geniuses. Obviously, we work with Experience Lights. We started doing that because their controllers work well. And we do in our store carry their ready to runs, which can hit a really, really, really good price point for a fully built controller. And out of the controllers that we've sold and shipped to customers, the amount of issues that we've had is like none, almost none. They've been really good, really reliable for people, something we've been really happy with. So that's kind of our take here in 2026 is that on the controller side, man, Experience Lights is really kicking butt. No, there's not a show player built in, but there are some abilities, and there's upcoming firmware with more abilities to run some test sequences, run some basic patterns. But then when you do run it on a show, having a show player connected via Ethernet, one show player or Raspberry Pi can run many different controllers. For example, last year we had an installation with 100 controllers, I think, running off one Pi. Ran great. And they were all these Geniuses to these ready to runs. And, just can't say enough about them. They've really been good to us, and they've really been a solid controller. But if Genius is not your thing, Falcon's great. The Copes, again, we've just seen, especially with the fact that they've got a separate microcomputer that's connected kind of manually on the back. We've just seen a few more issues with either software or hardware reliability, not necessarily with the board itself, but more with the connection to the Beagle Bone or the Pi, and with FPP updates messing things up for people or making things inconsistent. So those have kind of fallen off of our favorites list. But to each their own, right? And that's why people in the comments will tell me that I'm wrong. However, especially when we talk to people with commercial displays, they say, hey, you know, just some of those inconsistencies that happen in the FPP based controllers, and Cope's not the only one. There's others in the market. Because of those, it's like, that's a good reason to go with something that's not FPP based. And Genius seems to be at the top of their game with those. Again, we've got them at aboveavl.com if you're interested, or get them from Experience Lights. Doesn't hurt my feelings. But of course, if you like this video, if it helped you, then hey, when you need supplies for your Christmas display, come to Above AVL. We've got solid pricing, we've got great stuff, and we'd love to earn your trust as a customer and be able to get you everything you need. If that sounds good, we'll see you guys there. Thanks.